Hey everyone, ready to dive into something we all wish we had more of. Attention. We're taking a deep dive into Daniel Goldman's Focus, or at least the excerpts you all sent over.
It's so true. We all know we should focus more, but Goldman actually gives you that aha moment to understand it.
Totally. He doesn't sugarcoat it either. He comes right out and says, we're in an attention crisis. Remember that bit about the mom on the ferry, glued to her iPad while her kid's tugging at her sleeve? Oof.
Yeah, I felt that one. But what I find interesting is Goldman doesn't just stop at pointing out our tech obsessions. He talks about the cost of all this distraction. And not just, oh, I didn't finish that task cost, but the cost to our relationships.
Right. He even says it can make us feel lonely, which sounds kind of dramatic, but when you think about it, scrolling through social media instead of having a real conversation, it adds up.
It does. And then there's learning. Goldman argues all this constant info overload makes it tougher to learn deeply. We're so used to skimming, to switching between tasks, that our brains kind of get stuck there.
Like we're training our brains to have the attention span of, like a goldfish.
Basically. But, okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. Goldman also makes a really strong case for why focus is the key to, well, pretty much everything worthwhile.
Seriously, he talks about everything from creativity to making good decisions to being a better leader. You can tell he's thought this through.
Right. And it's not just vague self-help stuff. He gives the example of a star quarterback. You know, those guys who have to process a million things at once during a game.
Yeah.
Goldman says that level of performance, that's not just talent. It's highly trained focus.
So it's not just about getting stuff done. It's about doing it at your absolute best. That's kind of inspiring, actually. So how does our brain actually do this whole focusing thing? Goldman gets into the neuroscience, and it turns out our brains are kind of a mess in a fascinating way.
It's a mess, but a beautifully complex one, you know? Goldman talks about these two parts of the brain that are kind of in a constant tug of war. He calls them the bottom-up and top-down minds, which sounds kind of funny when you first hear it.
It does sound a little Dr. Seussy.
Right. But it makes sense. So the bottom-up mind, that's your inner toddler impulsive, wants what it wants right now, driven by emotions, that instant gratification.
And the top-down mind is the one telling that toddler to sit down and eat their veggies.
Exactly. It's more strategic, the planner, thinking about consequences, long-term goals, all that grown-up stuff.
Okay, so our brain is basically a toddler throwing a tantrum while a very tired adult tries to reason with them. And honestly, sometimes that toddler wins. When you should be working on that project, but social media.
Oh, tell me about it. And Goldman would say that's a perfect example of the bottom-up mind taking over. It's not just external distractions either, like our phones buzzing. It can be our own thoughts and feelings derailing us.
Oh, for sure. It's like when you're trying to have a serious conversation, but all you can think about is that embarrassing thing you said earlier. Ugh, the worst.
Right, and Goldman actually has a name for that. He calls it the imp of the perverse, which is a little dramatic, but it fits. It's that thing where you try not to think about something and it just makes it worse.
Totally. It's like our brain is purposely trying to sabotage us.
Yeah.
But, okay, so it's not all bad news, right? There's got to be a way to, wrangle that imp.
There is, and this is where it gets empowering. Goldman says we can actually train our brains to be calmer and more focused. He calls it cognitive control, basically. Learning to hit the brakes on those automatic impulses.
Okay, so how do we do that? Asking for a friend.
Well, Goldman have a whole bunch of strategies, but one he keeps coming back to is mindfulness. And before you tune out thinking, oh, I'm not the meditation type.
No, keep going. I'm intrigued. I actually tried a meditation app once for 3 days.
It really does take practice. But Goldman makes a good point. Mindfulness isn't just about sitting on a cushion chanting Om. It can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths, noticing the sensations of your body, just bringing your attention to the present moment.
Huh. So it's mini mental breaks throughout the day to reset.
Exactly. And the research is pretty wild, actually. Goldman talks about studies showing that even short periods of mindfulness can strengthen the neural circuits for attention.
Wait, so it's like doing bicep curls, but for your brain.
Exactly. The more you practice, the better you get at noticing when your mind wanders and then gently guiding it back.
Okay, I'm kind of getting this. It's like you're building a mental muscle for focus. But it's not just about concentration, right? Didn't Goldman also talk about how mindfulness can help us deal with, difficult emotions?
He did. He talks about how mindfulness can actually help calm the amygdala, that part of our brain that freaks out when we're stressed. So instead of getting swept away by, say, anxiety, We can learn to observe those feelings without letting them control us.
So it's less about, like, not feeling stressed, more about not letting it, like, take over your whole day.
Totally. And this is important for everyone, but especially kids. They're growing up in an even more distracting world than we did.
No kidding. Yeah, I can barely keep up, and I'm practically glued to my phone.
Yeah.
Though maybe that's not the best example.
Well, Goldman talks about the school that's having amazing success with a technique they call breathing buddies. The kids have these little stuffed animals they hold on their bellies while they do deep breathing exercises.
Oh, that's adorable. And also kind of brilliant. I wish I had a breathing buddy. But it sounds like Goldman's whole view of attention goes way beyond, like, just getting things done or even managing your emotions. He seems to connect it to, like, bigger picture stuff.
You're picking up on something really important. He does. He connects attention to empathy, to leadership, even to our ability to understand, like, really complex systems. It's about focusing outward, not just inward.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. Tell me more about this connection between attention and empathy. So you were saying Goldman connects attention and empathy, which is interesting, right? Because I think empathy would be about, like, not focusing on yourself so much.
Right. And Goldman actually says it's not about just, like, spreading your attention super thin. It's more about a specific kind of attention. He calls it social sensitivity, basically. How well you can tune in to other people's emotions, even the stuff they're not saying out loud.
Okay, so it's like listening with your whole being, not just your ears. Picking up on tone of voice, body language, all that.
Exactly. He's got this whole story about a woman, Katrina, who was, like, incredibly good at this. She'd notice these tiny things of facial expression, how someone was standing, and just know what they were feeling, even if they were trying to hide it.
Wow. Kind of like having a superpower. But I bet that could be exhausting too, right? Like being that tuned in all the time.
That's exactly what Goldman says. It was a gift and a burden for Katrina. On one hand, super compassionate, really connected to people, but also she was getting hit with everyone's emotions all the time, which sounds overwhelming.
Yeah, like emotional overload. Makes you realize there's a balance, right? You can't be there for others if you're totally drained yourself.
Definitely. And this is where Goldman brings in systems thinking, which sounds kind of big picture, but bear with me. Remember that quarterback example? Seeing the whole field. It's like that, but for, like, everything.
Okay, so explain it like I'm 5. What is systems thinking?
Basically, it's about seeing the connections between things, not just looking at one little part, but how it all fits together, how our actions ripple outward.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So less tunnel vision, more panoramic lens.
Exactly. Goldman talks about these magazine sellers, right? They had all this waste, unsold magazines ending up in landfills. At first, they were just focused on, like, how do we throw away less? But then they realized they had to look at the whole system, publishers, distributors, even the customers.
So it was bigger than just their one little piece of the puzzle.
Right. And that's what Goldman says is so important, especially now, the big challenges we're facing, climate change, inequality. You can't solve those just focusing on your own little corner of the world.
Makes sense, but also kind of daunting. Like, how do you even begin to think on that level?
It takes practice, for sure. But Goldman talks about asking what-if questions a lot, exploring possibilities, consequences, and seeking out different perspectives, not just staying in your own little bubble.
So more information, but also being open to it, challenging your own assumptions.
Exactly. And that's where mindfulness comes back in. Goldman says it can actually help us be better systems thinkers by being more aware of our own biases, more open to new info.
Wow. Okay. So mindfulness isn't just about, like, feeling calmer. It's like this superpower for making better choices for ourselves, but also for the world around us.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up Goldman's message. It's not just about having attention, it's how we use it.
It's about being intentional, choosing what we focus on, and letting that guide us towards hopefully a better future.
Well, that was an incredible deep dive into the power of attention. If you take away just one thing today, let it be that your attention is precious. It really is the foundation for a more focused, more empathetic, more impactful life. So go out there, be mindful, and choose your focus wisely.